Against a backdrop of global tension, I recently interviewed His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who shares his view of the unrest in the world today, including the crisis in Ukraine. And he tells us about his meeting with President Obama and why he's breaking nearly 400 years of political tradition. The Dalai Lama, plus a discussion on the United States response to that building crisis in Ukraine on this edition of Politicking. Welcome to Politicking. As tensions continue to rise in Ukraine, we'll get perspective from two Washington insiders, including the chairman of the House Services Committee and a former U.S. ambassador. But first, I recently had the honor to interview one of the world's great spiritual leaders and Nobel Prize winner, His Holiness the Dalai Lama. We talked about his meeting with President Obama and about the possibility of autonomy for Tibet during his lifetime. And I asked him about the unrest in the world today, including developments in Ukraine. Here's what he said. But you look at the world, you look at Venezuela, the Ukraine, Syria. You ever think people will stop killing each other?
Right. Very sad. All this, too much self-centered attitude and short-sighted. Not using properly human common sense. And too much emotion. Once destructive emotion become out of control, then no room to think normal way. I think 20th century become like a century of violence, use force immensely. Never solve problem. You see, violence create unexpected consequences. So therefore, now this 21st century should be, I usually call, century of dialogue. Any problem have to solve through talk. That's the only way.
You recently met with President Obama. What was discussed?
Of course, this is third time meeting. Even before he became president, as a senator, I met. So we know each other. So I really felt some kind of reunion. And then I want to report what I'm doing. 3 commitments. Number 1, promotion of human value. Second, promotion of religious harmony. The third, regarding the Tibet, now political responsibility is concerned. I already retired. The same Dalai Lama, when we met previously, I also have the sort of responsibility of Tibetan political, or say the business. Now, 2011, I completely retired from political responsibility. Not only myself retired, but also almost 4-century-old tradition.
Why?
Dalai Lama institution automatically become head of both temporal and spirituality. Now that I voluntarily cease. So I feel very happily or proudly ended in that sort of system. Why? You see, I believe that the democratic system is no matter some drawbacks here and there, but basically best, because I always telling people, I believe world belongs to 7 billion humanity. Each country belongs to the people. So one time I expressed in this country, America belongs to about 300 millions of American people, not a Democratic Party or a Republican Party.
Why does China care so much about Tibet? It's such a small picture in the world picture compared to China. Why do you think, why can't they get together?
I think in at the beginning, initial sort of stage, that was 1950s, then the leader, particularly like Mao Zedong, and also Stalin. You see, in their mind, the worldwide revolution is something very fresh. When I was in Peking, 1954, 55, I was very much attracted the sort of the thinking global level, at least working class people of the whole world.
That's, rise.
Oh, that I think is very, very right. Usually, you see the working class people, less privileged people. So then eventually, they found a lot of minerals in Tibet. So sometimes some Chinese sort of, the experts, they describe Tibet as some kind of, the treasure house or something like that. You see, they mentioned that also, I think, one factor.
Do you think, honestly, that in your lifetime, you will see an accord?
Oh, yes.
You do?
I feel that China is changing.
Have you met or would you like to meet the new Pope?
Yes, I'm very, very eager.
What do you think of him?
Wonderful. I think he truly implement, you see, their teaching. The one thing I admire his dismissal on German, I think, bishop. You see, maybe a very nice person, but his sort of lifestyle, very, very luxurious sort of lifestyle.
Austere.
Oh,
yeah.
So you see, he dismissed. I think that's very right.
Good point. Last year, Pope Francis criticized capitalism. He said capitalism excludes the poor, creates new tyranny. You have said the free market can work if it's infused with compassion.
Yes.
You see a dichotomy there between what he said and you said, or you think it works?
I don't think, you see,
compassion and capitalism aren't often put together.
So anything which can, which have sort of different aspects. So from one angle, yes, the capitalism only think profit.
Right.
Whereas Marxist economy, we see think the equal distribution. However, the capitalism in free country, the rule of law, and also, the certain regulations. So also is make difference. Finally, no matter what system, the person who carry that system with sense of responsibility, sense of concern of well-being of other, then any system can work.
You can catch my entire interview with His Holiness the Dalai Lama starting Monday on Aura.tv. We covered many other areas, including what he thinks of same-sex marriage, more talk on relations with China, and whether there might ever be a female Dalai Lama. It's a fascinating interview. You can also follow me on Twitter at Kingstings, and I'll remind you when the entire interview gets posted. Now let's turn to the U.S. response to the building crisis in the Ukraine. Joining me from the United States Capitol is House Armed Services Committee Chairman, the Republican Congressman from California, Buck McKeon. Buck, you recently said, and thanks for joining us, history judges perpetrators of these actions poorly, as it judges those who stand idly by. Our response should demonstrate that the United States stands by its friends and against bullies. Are you calling for military action?
No, I don't think we're at that point. I think that there are things that we can do. I think that we can help economically. I know our leadership is preparing a bill to bring to the floor to help our friends in the Ukraine to establish their own freedoms and decide their own fates rather than be put upon by neighbors' aggression that Putin's trying to do. So, no, I don't think we're anywhere near talking about military intervention.
You don't think the public would ever support sending troops there, do you?
I don't think we're talking boots on the ground. I don't think we should be. I think there are many other things we can do. I think that the world attention is focused on this, the way that people can, from around the world can see and judge for themselves what's happening. I think Putin's put himself in a bad position. I think he's put the Russian people in a bad position. I think the Ukrainians are on the side of the right, and I think we're in good ground standing with them as our friends. I think the European community is also joining in to help. So I think we're far short of any military intervention.
There are those who have said in the past, no matter who the president is, that we should not be critical in areas of foreign policy publicly because it hurts us internationally to criticize the president. How do you respond to that?
You know, I've been critical of the president. I think probably the reason we're in this position is because he's done some things in the past that have actually encouraged aggression. But I don't think now is a time to be jumping on the president. I think he has stayed a position. I think we should support that. I think that Putin is way out of line in moving troops into a free country. And I think that the president's right in calling him to task for it, and I hope he will stand up to him.
Many in your party, though, remain very critical. Senator Graham recently said that we have a weak and indecisive president that invites aggression. But you're saying temper that.
I am. I'm saying that probably that's what's gotten us into this position, but now's not the time to try to make political hay. I think this is something, it's a time when we should stand together as a nation to support another nation, the Ukrainians, who are in trouble because of aggression by a neighbor. I think the whole world community ought to rally behind the Ukrainians and let them set their own, what they feel their government should be and what they feel their nation should be, not to be determined by an aggressive neighbor.
Mr. Chairman, you've been around a long time. What do you make of Mr. Putin?
Well, I think he's taking advantage of a situation. He moved into Georgia a few years ago. We didn't do anything. He still occupies 20% of that territory. I think he will go much like a schoolyard bully. Until somebody bloodies their nose, they'll push as far as they can. And I think that's basically, he will push and push and push until he's stopped. And now's the time to stop him.
How do you think it's all going to end out?
Well, I've never pretended to be a prophet. I think that my feeling is that if we will hold firm and the European community joins in, that we've seen this movie before. You know, we let Hitler go, and maybe if he takes Poland, maybe if he takes France, you know, I think the time to stop aggression is when it starts.
We'll have some more moments with Congressman McKee, and we'll also hear from a former U.S. ambassador right after the break.
Welcome to the future.
Science, technology, innovation, all the latest developments from around Russia.
We've got the future covered.
Their patients are force-fed.
Two explosions near the finish line of the Boston Marathon.
More than 1,000 people have gathered.
What is the latest that you're hearing about the number of victims?
It was a terrible mistake, and we're working very hard to make up for it.
And once again, we put something on the air. It's a flat-out lie.
Have you ever had sex with Governor Rick Perry?
No, wait. Do not answer that.
I want you to watch what we're about to do because you've never seen anything like this on television.
Let's continue our discussion on America's response to escalating tensions in the Ukraine. We're back with House Armed Services Chairman, Republican Congressman Buck McKeon. Does Germany appear to be a problem in this, Mr. Chairman?
Well, I think it's incumbent upon all the neighboring communities, all of the neighboring countries over there, I think, to join in the effort to push back this aggression. I don't know why Germany is holding back, but I think it's important for everybody in the area to step up, and I would think Germany, most of all, should understand that we shouldn't allow aggression.
Mr. Chairman, another couple other areas quickly. The president recently ordered the Pentagon to begin formally preparing for a complete withdrawal from Afghanistan by the end of the year. You agree?
No, I don't. I don't know exactly what happened in this conversation with Karzai, but I think when I was in Afghanistan last year and visited with General Dunford and with Secretary Hagel, we were unanimous in the feeling that the bilateral security agreement was very important. It was very important for us to leave a residual number of troops behind to ensure that we continue to train the Afghans and help them and back them up in the things that they need until they're fully able to handle their own security. And Karzai said that he would sign the agreement if the loyal Jirga, that's the leadership all around the country, 2,500 people, if they supported it. They unanimously supported it, and then he still refuses to sign. Most of the candidates running for president to replace Karzai in the April election have said they will sign it. I don't think we should build our foreign policy or address our security needs based on Karzai, who will be leaving the office shortly. So I think that while the president has asked them to make plans to be able to withdraw, the Army always has plans to cover every contingency. At the same time, I think we should be doing everything we can to get that bilateral security agreement signed. 70% of the Afghan people want us to stay. They're scared to death that we'll leave. The Taliban are telling them that we're leaving. I think it's very important for us to stay. It's very important for the president to decide on the number of troops to leave behind. And the NATO has already said that they will support us, that they will support the Afghans through 2017. And a coalition of governments around the world have agreed to funding the effort up through that 2017. So I think it's very important that we proceed forward. Karzai can do whatever he wants, but I think we have to deal with the Afghan people as a whole.
Mr. Chairman, there's so much volatility on the Hill. You recently said one of the factors in your retirement was the naysayers within the Republican ranks who have frustrated House leadership. Is that the only reason you're leaving?
No. I've been here now 20-some years. You know, there are people that would like to see congressmen only serve for 6 years. So I think I've been here. I think the time is right. I'm term limited as chairman of the committee. I don't want to be hanging around getting in the way of the new chairman. We have a great bench on our committee. We've got lots of people that can take over and continue the fight. I'm not leaving the fight. I'm just leaving Congress.
You oppose the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Still feel that way?
Well, you know, I'm still waiting to hear from the military. When we passed that, was supposed to give us updated reports. We haven't seen anything yet, so I'm kind of withholding judgment until I have a chance to see how it is working. I still have concerns about it. I don't think that we should be using our military for social experimentation. And so I kind of right now I'm in a position to wait and see what they find out as a result of what's happened so far.
What's going to happen in the midterm elections this year?
Well, Republicans will keep the House, and I think that there's now an ever-increasing chance that we'll take the Senate. And I think, as I talk to people, they're so concerned about what's happening around the world. They're really concerned with Obamacare and what's happening in every individual's life in this country. People that have come to me and told me terrible stories of how they've lost their insurance. I had a family. I was just flying on a plane over the weekend, and the couple sitting behind me told me that they have a son that has special needs and needs special medicine, and they've lost the insurance, and they can't give him the medicine needs. I mean, stories like that should not be happening in this nation.
Mr. Chairman, thanks for joining us. Best of luck in all you do when you leave.
Thank you. Good to see you, Larry.
Good seeing you, Buck. Thanks to Chairman McKee. And joining us now from Washington, D.C. is Mark Ginsburg, former U.S. ambassador to Morocco. He also served as deputy senior advisor to the president for Middle East policy. He's now the CEO of One Voice. All right, Mark, what's your assessment right now of the current situation in the Ukraine?
Well, Larry, good to be with you. I was watching Secretary of State Kerry as well as President Putin's separate press conferences. It was ironic how Secretary Kerry, when he was in Kiev, told of the fact that Mr. Putin had denied that there were Russian troops stationed in the Crimea, could not possibly believe his ears. And so the question really comes down to is the two separate dimensions by which the U.S. and its European allies are operating with respect to Putin's moves in Crimea, as well as a potential authorization of additional force he received from the Russian parliament to move into the Russian-speaking area of Ukraine. It still speaks of a significant potential outbreak of hostilities between the Ukrainian forces and Russia, which, of course, would lead anyone's guess to where that would lead.
All right, since sending in troops is out of the question, what next?
Well, I think, Larry, it depends on whether or not the Obama administration can convince our European allies to impose a sufficient level of economic sanctions on Russia that would, in effect, penalize Putin where it hurts, and that is the ruble currency, trade with certain European countries and the United States, as well as visa denials to major Russian business leaders. Now, do you think in the end that I think that that's going to wind up causing Putin to pull out of the Crimea? I doubt it. I think all of this comes down to a question in the end of whether Putin believes that he can get away with swallowing up pieces of Ukraine and essentially deal with the pain of some limited economic sanctions, because that's all in the end is the cost-benefit analysis he has to go through.
Does the criticism of him here affect Obama's impact on other European countries?
Well, I think so. I mean, after all, it's not just merely a question of United States leadership. It's also the fact that there are countries bordering on Ukraine, such as NATO, countries of Poland and Romania and others that are quite concerned over Putin's imperialistic designs in Eastern Europe. Remember, there are a lot of countries that are now members of NATO that Putin wanted to make sure that they never became part of NATO, and the subversion that Putin is engaged in Ukraine and other countries in Eastern Europe, Belarus, Moldova, and others, are something that we can't laugh at. I mean, he has a script, we do not. And when you have a script and prepared to use force, it's pretty damn hard to try to counter those moves unless you have your own script.
He's the offensive team, we're the defensive team, and we don't know who he's throwing to or if they're going to run a play up the middle.
Well, exactly, and let's face it, in the country of Georgia, he carved up that country and basically left two semi-independent states, that South Ossetia and Abkhazia. He clearly wants to divide Ukraine down the middle between the Russian and Ukrainian-speaking parts. He clearly is determined to prevent other countries in Eastern Europe from joining a European Union customs market. He obviously is very upset that he lost his puppet. That's the president of Ukraine, Mr. Lukashenko, who was overthrown and who he still considers to be the legitimate leader and the duly elected leader of Ukraine.
Senator Lindsey Graham says Obama should stop going on television trying to threaten thugs and dictators. It is not his strong suit. People's eyes roll when they see Obama do that. What is his strength and his non-strength in this area, do you think, Ambassador?
Well, listen, it's no doubt that I think a lot of us who are Democrats have been quite concerned over some of the residual fallout of the president's failures to back up his words with deeds, whether it's in Syria or with Iran or elsewhere. But Lindsey Graham's criticism, I think, goes to more about the fact that Lindsey Graham is in a primary campaign in South Carolina. And so it's great to throw a lot of fuel on the fire right now against the president in order to buttress your position back home with your own election campaign. But at the same time, I would ask Senator Graham, what would you do more than what the president could do without our European allies? Are you going to try to stand up militarily to Putin? That doesn't make any sense, and I don't think that in the end, no matter what Mr. Graham says, he has much of a better idea than any one of the rest of us.
Is the president a little bit of a dichotomy here? You pointed out a little weak in Syria, maybe a little weak in Iran, yet he got rid of Osama bin Laden. He drones people. What's your assessment of him?
Well, I think the White House has been operating under a clear guideline. Whether it's a red line or a guideline, you can choose your pick here, Larry. But he came into office determined to keep the United States out of any other further military engagement. So whether it's Syria, whether it's Crimea, whether there's anything involving the Chinese efforts to take over Japanese or South Korean islands, he wants to leave office as the man who did not get the United States engaged in another ground war. And frankly, when you have that as your defining red line on your foreign policy, it certainly makes it very hard for you to be able to act in a way that legitimates credibility with adversaries and allies.
So it makes him, in other words, that's the wrong approach. He shouldn't, that makes him appear weak?
Well, what it does is basically say to our allies and adversaries, and you know, Prime Minister Netanyahu was just here in Washington today speaking to AIPAC, and he set a very defiant tone against the president's foreign policy in the Middle East, and our allies in the Middle East feel the same way, that the administration is making up its foreign policy based on reactive actions and events that occur rather than to have a prescribed foreign policy that sets out a clear agenda that is consistent with the challenges that the United States faces abroad. It's very politicized and less strategic, and that's my assessment after watching this team operate for the last 5 years here.
But if your opponents know you're not going to resort to weaponry, doesn't that give them an edge?
Well, of course it does, and it basically raises questions not only about our credibility, but let's suppose if the president had said or did not say that Assad has to go, and then not back it up when he was using chemical weapons. Don't you think that that sends a clear signal to the rest of the world that the United States really has no fire in the stomach to deal with even our interests? I mean, just using Syria as an example, hundreds of thousands of casualties, millions of refugees, red lines crossed, the president saying that he was going to use force, and then we walk away because in the end the president didn't have the stomach to follow through on his commitment. And the bottom line is that that sends a signal in the black and white world of adversaries and allies when it comes down to geopolitical interests, and there's nothing that you and I can do to make that more palatable to this administration.
Ambassador Ginsburg, always good to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Good to be with you as always, Larry.
Thank you, Ambassador Ginsburg, and thanks also to you for joining us today. And don't forget, I want you to join my conversation on my Facebook page, and I want to share your thoughts on Twitter by tweeting at King's Things and use the politicking hashtag. That's all for this week's Politicking.